Today we're going to talk about visual regression testing, or sanity checks with BackstopJS. Let's give it a little bit of background. So if you don't know about what visual regression testing is, it's basically a way to test your UI using to make sure that nothing has changed by using screenshot diffs. And so first it goes and it takes a baseline or reference screenshot, and then it creates that reference screenshot is kind of like the sort of that reference screenshot is kind of like the so-called gold standard that you're going to test all of your other following screenshots up against. And the question becomes, well, why should we do this? Well, for one, we're already doing it. As front-end developers, we kind of eyeball things. We want to make sure that things work. I just made this change. Did this change actually happen? But sadly, we don't really catch everything. And as a project kind of grows in its scope and its complexity, it becomes even more time-consuming, not to mention working in terms of responsive breakpoints, a variety of browsers. It just becomes very, very taxing. Personally, for me, I can speak to this because I was working on a product, I want to say, about 2 months ago, where I was tasked with cleaning up the SAS code base. A lot of it was just straight-up CSS, written in a .scss file. There was a lot of redundancies and so on. And I spent about 5 to 6 days cleaning everything up. And I submitted it as a pull request. Everything went cool. I figured everything was good. And that, I thought, was the end of it. Until about a week and a half later, when it was brought to my attention that I had introduced actually about 4 to 5 different visual regressions that I didn't even know about, even though I had tested before every single commit that I even did. So even with the best of intentions, we don't necessarily catch everything. So now that we've chatted a little bit about the whys, there's a question of when. And it turns out this is a pretty contentious topic in visual regression testing. When should you actually do it? It seems to me that, from my research, that no one really has the right answer to it, and maybe there is no right answer. It's really just a matter of what works for your team and what works for you. Personally, I find it to be really useful at the pull request stage, because that's where we typically do our code reviews. We typically that's where we have another pair of eyes that looks on the thing and says, oh, you missed something, you've introduced a bug here, and so on. And if you do use like a build tool like Travis CI or Jenkins, this area right here would actually be pretty perfect for it. So to me, I feel that the pull request stage is kind of the sweet spot. But also what's really good is the ability to do it manually, kind of at a sort of ad hoc approach, with the idea of just testing whenever you feel it's probably a good idea. Whenever you want a sanity check, whenever you just want the confidence to kind of move forward and know that nothing has changed. And I've noticed that some people do it pre-commit, but for some workflows, that might be a little overkill, doing a visual regression test before you do every single commit. But if you do that manually, that's kind of up to you. So now a little bit about the dilemma of choosing a tool, because I think all front-end developers can kind of agree to this. Things are kind of settling down a little bit, just a tad. But in choosing a tool and in researching visual regression testing, the more I started to research it, the more I kept going up into end-to-end testing, running nightly builds, firing up virtual machine instances for multiple testing environments, and so on and so forth. And realistically, all I really wanted was to know if something had changed in my UI. I just wanted to know, hey, I made a series of changes. Is everything good? And so because of that, this lecture is only about sanity checks. And so in terms of tools, I looked at Phantom CSS, BackstopJS, Selenium, plus a slew of other tools. If you don't know, Selenium is kind of like the industry standard for some time now in end-to-end testing, and that's not just UI testing, that's unit testing, service testing, and so on. A big asterisk right about now to this talk. If you're already using Selenium, I'm not telling you that you shouldn't. This is just a simpler, faster way to kind of run your tests. And there's also Gemini plus Browser Stack. And Gemini is actually particularly interesting, one, because it's the folks who gave us BIM, the folks at Yandex, but those are the main tools that I looked at. And whenever I'm looking at a new piece of technology and I'm deciding, should I use this, I always kind of either logically or just, I guess, inherently, I think about three things. For one, I think, does the benefit of this tool outweigh the cost, the cognitive overload of me, or the cognitive load of me having to learn it? I also want to know, what does its future look like? Do they have outside funding, i.e., Angular being funded by Google? What are key players in the industry thinking? If Chris Coyier and Paul Irish say, 2 thumbs up, I'm probably going to look into it. And also, of course, what does its community size look like on GitHub? How often do they take pull requests? How many contributors are there? When was the last commit? And so on. And of course, it seems like it has some sort of longevity, and we can tell that it's got some definite benefits, but how easy is it to implement into my current workflow? And when I first gave this talk to the Watson front-end developers, the Watson Health front-end developers, rather, I wanted something that I could give to the other teams that they could immediately kind of implement into their own workflow quicker than not. And so based on that criteria, I look at 2 different ones. I ended up looking at Gulp, Phantom CSS, and BackstopJS. Now, based on the community size and the activity, I chose BackstopJS. And shout out to Affleck. It's going to be all right. So, BackstopJS, it's pretty simple. It's got a pretty large and active community. I think it's a little bit larger than Phantom CSS at this point, and you can use it via Gulp or NPM. I was initially using it through Gulp, but after talking to one of the maintainers yesterday, I think it's compatible now, but they're going to be using NPM moving forward. So it readily fits into, I guess you could say, a modern front-end developer's toolkit. And like Phantom CSS, BackstopJS is a combination of PhantomJS, Casper.js, and Resemble.js. PhantomJS, if you don't know, is a headless browser, which is a really, really cool name for a browser simply without a GUI. And it's useful for doing stuff like rendering a DOM or doing AJAX requests, stuff like that. And on top of PhantomJS, we have Casper.js, which is created to simulate user behavior, clicking on buttons, going to different pages, entering text in the input fields, any type of usery thing. And then we have Resemble.js, which is the actual diffing tool itself that looks at those 2 screenshots, your baseline or reference screenshot against your test screenshots and says, hey, did anything change here? So let's get into a little bit of code. Let's see. All right. Do a quick prayer to the code demo gods, make sure everything's all right. All right, so first I'm going to show you this file. There's actually only three commands in BackstopJS. I really like the fact that it's fairly simple. And one of the commands is npm run genconfig.
Hey, now, David,
yes.
Would you mind increasing the size of that text, please?
Oh, absolutely. Sure thing.
You're a saint. Thank you. Appreciate it. Even more of you. Yes, that is beautiful. Thank you.
Okay, cool. All right, so in this is basically the config file that is run by that npm command. And within this file, of course, I'm not going to run through everything, but we're initially able to set the viewports that we want. In this case, this is my 16 unit with widths and heights. This is my would-be tablet, and this is the would-be mobile. On top of that, we're able to give labels to what we're actually looking at, and this is where the important parts, or one of the important parts, starts to be. And this is URL. This is actually whenever we run those actual tests, PhantomJS is going to go to this specific path. And so in my scenario, mine's on my desktop. And then we also have the reference URL. This is particularly interesting because I'm pointing elsewhere. And this is really good if you have a live site, or perhaps if you have like a pattern library that's established, which I assume plenty of people who are listening do. You could actually go and you could use that. You could take screenshots of your specific components within your pattern library that you can then test against from your site that you have in development. And so we also have the ability to hide selectors or completely remove them from the DOM. And you might want to do that, either one of these, specifically remove selectors, whenever you're targeting dynamic content. And we'll talk about the problems with dynamic content in visual regression testing in just a sec, as there is a bit of an issue. And this is the actual selector that we're using. For demo purposes, I decided just to go ahead and just use the body. In terms of a best practice, you probably want to be much, much more modular in your test. And so there's a good bit more of stuff. This is actually some Casper.js that I'll show you in a bit, and a few other options here and there. But that's kind of like, I guess you could say, the gist of the config file that's created. So since we've already run through the config file, let me show you, let me show you the site that we're going to be working on. Let's see here. And this is my example site, UpDog, where you can find everything related to UpDog. And so let me, real quick, take a screenshot of everything as it exists. And once again, if it's sort of hard to follow along, we're going to take screenshots of from the body selector, and we're going to take screenshots at 16 units, our desktop, our would-be tablet, and our mobile as well. And when we do that, it's actually going to create a folder that's going to live in this backstop_data folder. So I'm going, and I actually have to give you a short disclaimer right here. You actually have to you actually have to cd into your node modules /backstopjs. That's a really weird quirk, I know. But if that's and I was speaking to the maintainer of it yesterday, and he said that that's on the way to be phased out, along with gulp stuff as well. So it's a really weird quirk currently, but it's definitely a kink that's going to be ironed out. So I have already cd'd into the node modules /backstopjs folder, and this is where we're actually going to run our tasks. So let me run npm run, let's see here, npm run reference. And it's going to take our reference screenshots. And once again, if you forgot, our reference screenshots are kind of like the perfect state. That's kind of like the state by which we want, it's the ideal state where we want nothing to change. So let's go take a look at them real quick. So in reference screenshots, we've got our 16 unit, our 8 unit, and our 4 unit, 16 unit UpDog, 8 unit UpDog, and the 4 unit UpDog. So now I've run through that command. Let's talk about let's actually run a test. So we're going to go npm run test, and we're going to run a test screenshot up against what we just generated, our reference screenshots. So right now it's testing it, and the cool thing about BackstopJS is it actually gives you a report, and it shows you what is passed, what is failed, the differences, and then the threshold by which they actually passed or failed. And you can actually change that threshold as well, which is pretty cool, I think. And so in this case, everything passed, and so we're all good. But now let me go into, index.html, and let me change this real quick. So instead of UpDog, we got an UpCane. Let's see what happens there. And yes, I probably should purchase Sublime at this point. So I'll npm run test again, and let's see what happens. So of course they all failed because it turns out we don't have an UpDog, we've got a candy cane. And so this is kind of a pretty obvious example how when your UI changed, it's going to yell, hey, something failed here. Now, for regular purposes, you're probably not going to have candy canes come up in your UI, or maybe you do, I don't know. But let's just put this back, and we're going to run the test just to make sure everything's all good, and should be. Cool. So everything's back to normal again. That's good. And so that was something very obvious, a glaring thing in your UI. But what if it's something that's kind of small, something that humans might not necessarily be able to catch? In this case, what I've done is I'm going to add a little bit of padding to the intro title kind of H1. So it's just going to be 10 pixels of padding that I'm going to add. I'm going to save that, and then we're going to run that test one more time. All right, so we have a failure. So here we notice we can actually see the diffs. We can see that something is going on. Now, this is kind of, I'm showing you kind of two things in one here. I'm showing you, A, the fact that this catches things that maybe our eyes may or may not be able to catch so easily. And also, this is actually showing the problem with selecting, not making your test modular, showing only showing the entire thing rather than a specific component, like say a header, a footer, a sidebar, something of that sort. And so I'm going to go and I'm going to comment that out one more time, or actually I'm just going to take it out entirely. And we'll run the test, and of course, everything's going to come back cool. Okay, good. So I've showed you like an obvious glaring kind of visual regression. We've seen one that's not so easy to spot out. And now I'm going to show you how you can not only just do static things in terms of what you're going to be screenshotting, but you can use JS to actually take screenshots of specific states as well, which I find to be really, really cool. And so let's see. What I'll actually do, let me do it manually real quick just to show you. What I'm going to do is I'm first going to go to Join UpDog. So I'm going to click on this button, and this is all going to happen via JS. And then I'm going to go into UpDog to join UpDog. And after that, I'm going to type in my email. Let's say, just really love UpDog. And then after that, I'm going to hit submit, and I get an error state. And so what I want to do is I want to actually make this happen within JS. And so I've already created it. Let me just, I'll uncomment this and walk you through it. So the first thing is that Casper is going to wait for our specific URL to open. Our specific URL, of course, is this one right here, our initial one, our index.html. After that, Casper then clicks on this button, and then it waits for this selector to come up, this actual UpDog form ID. And then after that, it executes the function where it adds these values, roughrough@hotmail.com, and I just can't get enough UpDog, to these specific areas. After that, it clicks the submit button, it waits 1 second, and then it actually takes a screenshot with this .capture, and it saves it within this specific folder, user action screenshots, plus the viewport name .ping. So we're not necessarily making test screenshots. We're going to create an entirely new, make it an entirely new reference screenshot. So instead, instead of running npm run test, we're going to run npm run reference. And so make sure that's saved. Good deal. And as you see, this user action screenshots folder just got generated. And let's see, we should be good. So let's check it out real quick. So we've got UpDog in 16 units where it actually has checked out the state as well. It entered in these things and did submit. We have it in 8 unit, and we have it in 4 unit as well. And so through this short demo, we've seen how BackstopJS can catch glaring kind of errors. They can catch smaller UI errors, and they can also do states as well. And there's a lot more to it, but for this demo purpose, I just wanted to show you kind of the bare minimum, or the bare bones basics of it. So let's chat just a little bit more about challenges with visual regression testing, namely the biggest one I found, which is getting false positives from dynamic content. As front-end developers, we're not necessarily always working with static content. A lot of times we're working with live data. And so if you refresh your page and something changes, you're going to get a false positive in your visual regression test. So the question becomes, how do you get around that? Well, for one, what you could do is you can identify the actual dynamic content. You're going to target it, and prior to every visual regression test, you can use CasperJS to evaluate some JavaScript that either hides or removes that dynamic content. So what you're kind of doing with this dynamic content is you're effectively graying or darkening them out. And after you do that graying or darkening out, you're going to want to set a specific height to its parent element. So adding or hiding a piece of content won't cause the test to fail due to the shrinkage or expansion of its container. So basically what you're left with is a UI with several kind of grayed out or darkened out areas with fixed widths and heights of its parent element. And those that actual darkening or graying out is run before every time BackstopJS takes a screenshot. And so that's one way to get away from or to kind of work your way around getting false positives from dynamic content. An additional way that you can do that, of course, is to just not target the dynamic content, but this is a way that you could do. I guess you could do kind of both. And so, on to a little bit of best practices. For one, it's a pretty good idea to name your screenshots. If you have a pretty large application and you have a lot of reference screenshots, kind of perfect states, you're going to want to name those so you know exactly what you're looking at. And also, you shouldn't try to test everything. In the example, I've targeted the entire body element. But typically, you want to keep your tests a lot more modular. You want to think about them on a component by component basis, like a sidebar test, a nav test, a footer test, and so on. And that way, it's easier to track where the bug lies. And likewise, full-page screenshots are a pretty bad idea for the examples that we've already spoken to. But also, bigger screenshots mean longer processing time. And that's kind of like the beauty of BackstopJS, is the fact that it's fast enough to let you run it, see if something is missing, make sure that everything is okay, and allow you to get back to your workflow so you can continue going down the road. And in terms of scaling visual regression testing, this is something that could pop up later on down the line, because if you have a lot of reference screenshots and you're going to store them, which you more than likely will, your repo could kind of blow up in terms of its size. So you might want to use a tool like either GetAnnex or GetMedia to prevent that from happening. And lastly, if you have a pattern library, that's a really, really great way to keep things consistent, is actually make those elements or components your reference screenshots. And so that reference URL that you actually saw in the backstop.json, that could point to your specific components that you're trying to test out within your pattern library. And it'll make your life a lot easier, and and it'll increase the relevance, I'd say, of your pattern library as well. And so that's it for my talk for right now. Thank you guys for having me, and I definitely welcome any questions you might have. Thank you.
If there are any questions, feel free to type them in the chat in the meeting stream, or if you have one over the phone, *6 to unmute yourself. Is there anything in here in the room? We'll take James first. What you got, James?
Hey, David, have you implemented this in any projects with Travis?
I haven't yet. I've been looking at a few different projects that have been using it, and it seems like it's fairly successful. But as to my own, I haven't implemented within Travis CI yet.
Cool.
Something to maybe look into later.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you.
Is there a way to test stuff behind like a login page? Like, is there a way to, set like headers for like authorization or stuff like that? Behind
a login page? I'd imagine that you could do that through CasperJS. The idea would be to put a username and password on there. With that said, you probably wouldn't want your credentials to probably be on there. So that would be a kind of maybe you could have like a set test user, a test username and test password that you could then use with CasperJS to kind of, hey, I want you to go into this page. I want you to input this specific text, the username into the username and password into password, submit, and then after that, wait several seconds for you to actually get to your actual page that you're trying to test. and then take screenshots of those headers or footers that you mentioned. That would be a good idea.
Okay, cool.
The nice thing about that is you can then, since it's Phantom under the hood, since it's Phantom under the hood, or Casper, you could then reuse that login script for your functional tests as well.
Yeah.
So if you have the functional suite, you might already have that code.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Cool, thanks.
Any other questions here in the negative? All right, we have one in the chat. Dallas, can you move your head for 5 seconds? Thank you. Can you explain, this is from Dexter, can you explain more of the workflow of where this all fits in?
Sure, absolutely. To me, personally, I feel that it would be best in conjunction with a build tool like Travis CI or Jenkins so you can automate this before someone is actually able to submit a pull request. So that would just be one of your tests that you would run with Travis. I also feel that it's not just at the pull request stage, but also just manually. Whenever the developer is working on something and they want to run a test just to make sure, hey, like, say, for example, I just made a series of huge changes and I'm about to commit. I want to run a test just to make sure it'll work. So the ability to do it both at the pull request stage and also giving that power to the developer to do it whenever they necessarily feel like it or they need to, I think is kind of perfect. And it's very odd because I noticed throughout my research that a lot of people have a lot of opinions in terms of where this should happen, and no one seems to have the right answer. But it really is a matter of what works for you and what works for your team.
Great.
Jessica, can we go back to Dallas' question one day?
You mean James's question to Dallas? What was the reference here, James?
Yeah, there was a slide near the beginning of the presentation where you said gulp or NPM. Are you saying there's a choice there?
Yeah, you can currently you can do it via gulp or NPM. Initially, when I was giving this talk, I ran it via gulp, and in doing so, you have to run some strange quirks. Namely, there's a plugin called Gulp Chug. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it's basically a Gulp plugin that allows you to reference other Gulp tasks. And I was talking to Garris on GitHub yesterday, who happens to be he's one of the core maintainers of Backstop, and he said that actually Backstop it's still compatible with Gulp, but future facing they're trying to have it run solely via NPM. So for right now, you totally can run it through Gulp. But yeah.
That sounds smarter, anyways.
Yeah, it could be. Yeah.
All right, great. If there are any other questions you have for David, feel free to hit him up on our Fed at IBM Slack, slack.com/Fed. I think it's Fed at IBM. I forget. I say these things every week. Also, again, Hackademy, let us know if you want to join in on one of those locations. It's coming up here pretty soon. So other than that, thanks for coming, everybody. Thank you, David. That was
Thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
And have a wonderful afternoon.
Sure. You guys take care.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye, David.
Bye.
Bye.